Today I would like to share with you the story of the woman in this portrait. This lady's name is Sally Scher, S-C-H-E-R. And when I met Sally, she was in her 90s. She was the aunt of a good friend of mine who I met at Pioneer Village. And I became very good friends with her family. And she introduced me, my co-worker at Pioneer Village, and she introduced me to her mom and her dad, and eventually her wonderful Aunt Sally. And that's how she was known, the lady in this portrait, and that's actually what I called her, Aunt Sally. This lady had an incredible life. She never married, she never had children. I think she was born in Canada, but she lived in New York for quite a bit of time in the 50s and the 60s, I think. And during that time in New York, she worked for a few different people, but the company that I used to talk to Sally about was George Jensen, a silversmith, and Sally worked in the stationery department. I think this was in the 50s. She said that it was a different time, and it was a different way of doing things. People like Audrey Hepburn and Jackie Kennedy would come in. They were customers of Sally's in the stationery department, and everything was handled wearing white gloves. Sally was a member of the old guard. She was born in another time and grew up in another time. And when I knew her, I was very well aware that my time with her was limited because she was in her 90s. So I viewed those experiences as a little bit of time travel. When I knew Sally, she lived in a retirement home in downtown Toronto called Belmont House. And Belmont House was not far from where I went to school at the University of Toronto. So I would visit her every now and then. I even volunteered at Belmont House for a little while. One year when I had like big breaks between classes, I volunteered to just spend time with an older gentleman named Mr. Samples. I would sneak him, I asked, they said it was okay, McDonald's every now and then. He was bedridden and he was really, really old and had no visitors. So when I would visit Mr. Samples, I would go over and say hi to Aunt Sally. Sally would reminisce about her time in New York, and then she would always ask me what I was doing and what I was up to. And when I left Toronto and moved to New York, I would still visit Sally. So I moved to New York, and when I would go back home to Toronto, I would go and see Sally, and she would be very excited to hear about what I was doing in New York City. She believed that this was the place for me. She believed that in this city anything was possible, and she and I shared that opinion. We were excited about New York City, and even though it had been many years since she had lived here in New York, it gave her great pleasure to think about someone living in New York because she had such fond memories of her time here. This portrait is extremely valuable to me for two reasons. The first reason is that it is the portrait of someone who was very special. She was unlike anybody else I know. She would often say to me something that I didn't really understand. When she found out that I was moving to New York, she would often say to me, "You have to do what the world needs, and you have to give it to them." And I would say, uh-huh. She's like, and she would look at me with these, like she would narrow her eyes, she would lean in, and she had a very deep voice. She spoke like this. And she spoke with like an accent of like another time, kind of transcontinental. She would say, "My dear boy, you must give the world what they need, and New York City is the place to do it." That's how she spoke, and she would speak with such conviction. She would hold my hand, She'd take my hand in her hands, her really long, slender fingers, and she would just encourage me. And as I said, at the time, I didn't really know what that meant because I was in New York doing calligraphy. So I thought maybe she meant give them my art. And many years later, in the sort of present day, when I receive letters in my P.O. box from all over the world, when I read the comments in these videos, when I see how positively people are affected by me sharing my life, Sally's words make sense. And it's something that I could not have foreseen, that simply, metaphorically opening up my door to my life and inviting you in has affected positive change in the world. That is very fulfilling. And that echoes exactly what Sally was saying. Maybe she just knew something that I didn't know. Sally told me of an encounter she had when she lived in New York. She was at a sort of famous cafe with some friends. She was having lunch, and near their table was a very famous photographer who was recognized by the entire room. Everybody knew who he was. And the assistant sitting at the photographer's table came over to Sally, handed Sally his card, and said the photographer would like to see you on this day, whatever, he would like you to pose for him. And Sally said to me, and I never went. I never went. She just didn't go. She was self-conscious and she didn't go. And she sort of said it with regret in her voice. And she would follow that story up with advice. She said, in New York City, you must be willing to be lucky. You must be willing to be lucky. That's what she would say to me. Because I think she just regretted that she didn't go to that photographer and what could have come had she paid him a visit. So this portrait serves as a reminder of Sally's sage advice to me. It is a vestige of a woman that I knew that's from a different era who is captured here. But the second reason this is actually so important to me is because of what this is technically. This was a study done by a teacher at the school where Sally was a student. The school currently, it's still in existence in Toronto. It's called OCAD, the Ontario College of Art and Design. But in Sally's day, it was called the Ontario College of Art. And she was enrolled there as a student. And one of the teachers had her sit and painted like a full portrait of her, I think as a demonstration for the class. And that big portrait of Sally belongs to my friend. And she has it framed and hung in her house. I loved that portrait. I've always loved that portrait since the day I saw it, like over 25 years ago. And the frame was kind of falling apart, and I offered to fix it, and I actually fixed the frame for my friends, and they were really happy with the job that I did. I was so glad to contribute to Sally's portrait in a way. And when Sally would visit my friend's house, like she would come over for holidays and stuff, and we would all be together, and it was wonderful to see Sally in the room and have her portrait kind of opposite her old portrait. So I coveted that thing. And then one day, my friend told me that she had discovered a small portrait of Sally, unstretched, unframed, just in a drawer in Sally's apartment at Belmont House. And it was this. It is a little piece of canvas that was just sort of tucked away. And when we asked Sally about it, she said that this was a quick one-day demo that the teacher did. He asked Sally to sit there, and he showed the class like the elements of painting a portrait. I was offered this portrait by my friend, and I kind of couldn't believe it. And I just loved it. Like from the moment I saw it, I loved it for what it was technically. My dream, my goal of painting portraits like Sargent is rooted in the look that was achieved by this method of painting a portrait with, as Sargent said, the fewest brush strokes possible to express a fact. Not fussing away with very thin layers of oil like Da Vinci, but kind of something that was quick, yet very, very accurate and effective. And this portrait, to me, is that. So the fact that I know this person, but that it was painted in the style using a technique that is a technique that I have been working on learning, this serves as an example of something that I can actually study, and I have. I have looked at this so much over the years, picking it apart, analyzing how the elements go together, the complicated areas, but then the simple areas where, like, her shirt is not white paint. That's the bare canvas. And the teacher who was demonstrating just kind of blocked in the shape of her neckline and then painted everything else, including the background. It's chipping away at the background that creates the blouse. So there's the simplicity of that, but then there's the really highly skilled ability to render the shadow of the face, which is really nuanced, where it goes from like cool to warm to cool again without it looking muddy or gray. That is really, really difficult to do. You really have to know what you're doing, and there are like 3 brush strokes on there. And then there's a little highlight right here on her face that, like, boom, that after putting in the shadow, this boom just brings the shape of the cheekbone back to life. This was painted quickly. It was probably painted in one afternoon, maybe even quicker than that. Maybe it was even just an hour. But you can see that it's quick. So Sally was alive when Kate gave this to me. And I asked Sally about it. And I said, because looking at the style of the painting, Sally's hairstyle, her makeup, and even just like her white blouse, although it's just kind of a ubiquitous white blouse, I was like, Sally, was this painted in the 40s? And she goes, ha ha ha, my dear, I'm old, but I'm not that old. She was like, I think she was like 94 or something when I asked her. And then we sat and we calculated. She told me the year that she had like left for New York, and we kind of went backwards, and then she said, oh, you're right. It was the 40s. I think it was 46 or something that she sat for this portrait. So we had a chuckle about that. That she, hearing 40s, she's like, oh, 40s. Like, how could it have been the 40s? That's so long ago. Well, it was. It was the 40s. This is one of the possessions in this apartment that is very valuable to me. Almost sacred, and I hung it near my bed for an aesthetic reason. That was one of the reasons. I thought aesthetically on that wall, kind of the frame of the canopy of the bed creates like a frame on the wall, and I thought within that off-center, asymmetrically, hanging this small portrait was visually very powerful. Sentimentally, though, I feel wonderful to go to sleep every night under the gaze of this really beautiful woman who said very valuable things to me, which I will never forget. She said things to motivate me. She said things to encourage me. And those words have really helped me come to this place right now, where I am right now. So having Sally right there as the last thing I really see when I go to sleep before I turn out the light is powerful image. Aunt Sally, that's who's hanging on the wall.